For decades, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, has operated under a simple, powerful principle. It is a shield, not a sword. Formed after the devastation of the Second World War, its purpose was to be a purely defensive alliance. If one member nation was attacked, all other members would come to its aid. This idea, enshrined in Article 5 of its founding treaty, was the bedrock of European security. The rule was clear: NATO would never strike first, it would only ever respond to an attack, acting as a powerful deterrent to any nation that might consider aggressive action against one of its members. This posture was meant to keep the peace through strength and patience, not through provocation or preemptive action. This long-standing doctrine of reaction, rather than action, defined NATO's identity through the long, tense years of the Cold War and beyond. The alliance built its forces, conducted its military exercises, and made its strategic plans, all based on this fundamental idea of defense. It was a promise to the world that its immense military power would only be unleashed in response to aggression. This made NATO predictable, and, in many ways, reassuring. Its members knew the line that could not be crossed, and so did its adversaries. The alliance was a firefighter, waiting for the alarm to sound, not an arsonist looking to start a blaze. This was the established order of things, a grammar of international security understood by all. However, the world of 2025 is vastly different from the one in which NATO was born. The nature of conflict itself has changed. War is no longer just about tanks crossing borders or soldiers marching on a battlefield. Today, aggression can be subtle, creeping, and deniable. It can manifest as a mysterious drone flying over sensitive military sites, a vital undersea data cable suddenly going dark, or a coordinated cyber attack that paralyzes a nation's government and essential services. These hybrid attacks exist in a gray zone, designed to cause damage and instability without triggering a full-scale military response. They are acts of hostility that deliberately exploit NATO's traditional, reactive posture. Because of this new reality, the old rules are being questioned from within the alliance itself. The very foundation of NATO's defensive stance is being re-examined in the face of an adversary that refuses to play by the old rulebook. When an opponent is constantly punching you below the belt, simply waiting for a clean, declared punch to the face no longer seems like a viable strategy. The shield, designed to stop a telegraphed blow, is proving less effective against 1,000 pinpricks. This has forced a difficult and urgent conversation among NATO's leaders. Can a defensive alliance survive if it only ever waits to be hit? The answer, it seems, is no longer a confident yes. The pressure for NATO to change its thinking is not theoretical. It is a direct result of Russia's sustained campaign of aggression against its members. These are not open acts of war, but a persistent pattern of hostile actions designed to test, weaken, and intimidate the alliance. For example, in September of this year, Poland, a key NATO member on the eastern flank, experienced a deeply alarming incident when nearly 20 Russian drones crossed into its airspace. The event was so serious that it triggered Article 4 consultations, a formal process where members convene because they feel their security is threatened. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk described the situation as the closest we have been to open conflict since World War II, a stark warning about how thin the ice has become. These incursions are not isolated. Russian drones have also repeatedly violated the airspace of Romania, another NATO country bordering the Black Sea. Beyond the skies, the aggression has moved to the shadows and the deep sea. In late 2024, critical infrastructure linking European nations was targeted. Multiple undersea data cables, the invisible arteries of our digital world, were severed. A vital power link was also damaged, and a crucial railway line connecting Warsaw with Kiev, a lifeline for Ukraine, was sabotaged. The attacks were so severe that Poland was forced to deploy 10,000 of its own troops simply to guard its most important infrastructure, a mission that pulls resources away from other defense priorities. Alongside these physical acts of sabotage, NATO countries are under constant digital assault. Officials within the alliance report that they are dealing with Russian cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns on a daily basis. These operations seek to steal sensitive information, disrupt government functions, and, perhaps most importantly, sow doubt and division among the populations of NATO countries. They spread false narratives, amplify conspiracy theories, and try to erode public trust in democratic institutions. This is a war fought not with bullets, but with bites and propaganda, aiming to weaken the alliance from the inside out by making its citizens confused, angry, and distrustful of their own leaders and allies. Taken together, these actions paint a clear picture. Analysts and military leaders no longer see them as mere provocations. Maria Martisuti of the European Policy Center has argued that the repeated airspace violations over the Baltic region are not just tests, but a rehearsal for a war. Russia is systematically mapping NATO's response times, testing its defenses, and gauging its political will. Each drone flight, each cut cable, and each cyber attack is an act of aggression that falls just below the threshold of a traditional military strike. It is a calculated strategy to keep NATO off balance, forcing it to live in a constant state of reaction and anxiety, all while avoiding a direct, undeniable act of war. This relentless campaign of hybrid warfare forms the dark backdrop to the ongoing war in Ukraine and the fragile peace talks that are now underway. This very week is seen as pivotal. American officials, including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, are meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss a framework for peace. Yet these talks are viewed with deep suspicion in many European capitals. Leaders like Kaja Kallas, the Vice President of the European Commission, worry that the negotiations are designed to put, well, all the pressure on Ukraine, forcing it to accept a deal that would reward Russia for its aggression. The fear is that a so-called peace deal could cement Russia's territorial gains and leave Ukraine vulnerable to future attacks. This anxiety is not unfounded. Just last month, a draft peace plan from the United States was widely criticized as being too favorable to Russia. And even as diplomats prepare to talk, the violence continues. On the very eve of the peace talks, a Russian airstrike on Ukraine's Dnipro region killed civilians and wounded dozens more. This brutal act serves as a grim reminder that Russia's desire for peace might not be sincere. For many in Europe, it looks as though Russia is using the peace process as a tool of war, a way to freeze its gains on the battlefield while continuing its shadow war against the NATO countries that support Ukraine. This behavior makes it nearly impossible for European leaders to trust any promises made by Moscow. It is in this tense and dangerous context that NATO's military leadership is floating a radical new idea. Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragoni, the chairman of NATO's military committee, has openly stated that the alliance is considering a shift from being reactive to being proactive. He suggested that in the face of Russia's constant aggression, a preemptive strike could be considered a defensive action. This is honestly a monumental change in thinking. The idea is that if you know an attack is coming, whether it is a cyber attack, a sabotage operation, or a drone swarm, waiting for it to hit and cause damage is no longer a sensible strategy. Instead, it might be better to act first to disable the threat. This concept turns NATO's traditional posture on its head. It suggests that the best defense is now, in some cases, a good offense. Admiral Dragone acknowledges that this is a difficult path, filled with legal and ethical challenges that authoritarian states like Russia simply ignore. But he argues that the alliance must adapt to the tactics of its adversary. If Russia is constantly operating in the gray zone, launching attacks that are hard to attribute and harder to respond to, then NATO may need to develop its own capacity to act swiftly and decisively before a crisis escalates. The shield must learn to anticipate the blow, and perhaps, to strike back first. This potential shift towards a proactive or even preemptive doctrine marks the beginning of a new and uncertain era for NATO and for European security. If the alliance continues down this path, it will fundamentally change its character. It would mean moving from a position of passive deterrence, where its power was held in reserve, to one of active defense, where it might use force to prevent a threat from materializing. This would require not just new military capabilities, like advanced cyber weapons and long-range precision strike systems, but also new rules of engagement and a new political consensus among its 30-plus members, which would be, honestly, pretty difficult to achieve. The implications for Europe would be profound. On the one hand, a more proactive NATO could be a more effective deterrent against Russia's hybrid warfare. Knowing that the alliance might strike first to neutralize a threat could make Moscow think twice before launching sabotage operations or cyber attacks. Missions like Baltic Sentry, which was launched this year to guard against sabotage at sea, have already shown some success in deterring attacks. Expanding this proactive mindset to other domains could make NATO members feel safer and more secure. It would signal that the alliance is no longer willing to be a passive victim of gray zone aggression, but is ready and willing to defend itself robustly. However, this new posture carries significant risks. Russia has already condemned Admiral Dragon's comments as extremely irresponsible, accusing NATO of escalating tensions. A more aggressive stance, even if intended for defense, could be misinterpreted by Moscow as preparation for an offensive war. This could lead to a dangerous cycle of action and reaction, where each side feels compelled to act more aggressively to counter the other, increasing the chances of a miscalculation that could spiral into a direct, open conflict between nuclear-armed powers. The line between a defensive preemptive strike and an unprovoked act of aggression can be perilously thin, and crossing it could have catastrophic consequences for the entire continent. Ultimately, Europe stands at a crossroads. The peace and stability that it has largely enjoyed under NATO's defensive shield for 75 years is under threat from an adversary who plays by different rules. The debate over whether to become more proactive is a debate about survival in this new, more dangerous world. German intelligence has warned that Russia could be capable of attacking a NATO country by 2029. This gives the alliance a very short window to adapt. Choosing to remain purely reactive may feel safe, but it could invite further aggression. Choosing to act first could deter that aggression, but it also risks a terrifying escalation. The path NATO chooses will define the security of Europe for decades to come.